Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 12 of Weekend Warriors, the review series for GranTurismo sports cars and sports coupes and basically everything in between. Vehicles which offer strong performance, for the most part, for a more affordable package than, say, your top tier exotics, such as supercars and super sports cars. They offer a similar kind of feel and a similar kind of exciting style, both interior and exterior, but on a much lower budget. For the most part, at least. And this particular pick is a vehicle which kind of has a feeling to it wherein you'd probably think it would be in a different series, such as Import Knights. It would be a very appropriate car from a performance point of view and from the way it feels and the way it drives to have in that series. But I decided it felt more authentic and more appropriate to have it in this series instead, being that that series is predominantly, if not totally, for JDM performance cars, whereas this car is of course Korean. So although it is similar to many of those cars, and actually makes a very good rival to some of them, it's actually more appropriate really to put it up against its more global rivals, such as from companies like Infiniti, Pontiac, and European companies like Mercedes, BMW, Audi, to really put it up against those kind of models instead. Being as it is not a pure import style vehicle, but having a slightly larger engine, bigger, lazier torque, and more of a luxury, not necessarily more technically advanced, but more tech-heavy layout, very much like vehicles such as the Infiniti G37, which makes a pretty decent rival to this car. Now this car sits almost in a subcategory of its own due to how much upgrade potential Polyphony has endowed the car with, and the car is actually one of my favourite sports coupes. This may even be my favourite sports coupe, the Hyundai Genesis. Now my particular favourite version is not this car. I prefer the Genesis before it had this facelift. I don't like the front end of this car. I prefer the older model. But this model is a very strong performance car. Now, as is given away pretty easily in its name, the Genesis 3.8 Track is powered by a 3.8 litre engine. Now you can turbocharge that engine, which is more than you can say for many other vehicles in the game that deserve to have turbo or supercharging but don't get that option, such as notably from companies like Mercedes and BMW with some of their coupes. This car though is allowed to use the advantage of a turbo, and it really does make this car have some incredible numbers. 822 horsepower is fantastic power for this car, and that's the kind of power, not necessarily as high as that, but those kind of numbers are the kind of numbers that so many other vehicles deserve to be able to reach, but they just can't because they're not allowed to be upgraded with forced induction. They are forced to stay naturally aspirated, and that is such a shame because it in effect neuters those vehicles compared to how good they could be. This car, though, is allowed to have the kind of power that it deserves, and it is so fast for it. This car can do over 265 miles per hour under its own power. That's an incredible top speed compared to many of its rivals, which get nowhere near that. Now, as far as torque, this car also puts out a pretty decent amount, not necessarily as impressive as the power, but 576 foot-pounds certainly isn't lacking. It's also not as heavy as you'd probably expect at 1,246 kilos. That's a very good weight. With the full weight loss package for a big 3.8 litre well-equipped coupe, to weigh not much more than a WRC car, especially with 822 horsepower, that's potentially a very dominating package in the coupe category. The horsepower per tonne, as you'd expect, is very good. 660 horsepower per tonne is serious territory, especially for a road-going vehicle. As far as PP, it's surprisingly reasonable. You could easily expect this car to be over 600 PP. It's actually just under 591, and that's a really good PP if you think about just how much power you've got at your disposal in such a relatively light car. It's also a full premium, which means you get body upgrade options and a fully detailed interior, and it really does feel all the better for it, being a premium car. There are some cars that really deserve to be, well, there are lots of cars that deserve to be, all the cars in the game, but there are some cars that you'd think, well, why aren't they premium? Like the Jaguar XFR, that's a newer model, but for no apparent reason it's a non-premium. And not only is it a non-premium, it actually looks worse than some of the other non-premiums. But that's a side point. As far as this car goes, you really do get a huge spec, especially when you consider the price. This car only costs 33,000 credits, and for bang for buck, that's pretty hard to beat. 822 horsepower for 33,000 credits, that's bordering on the kind of value for money that you get from stuff like the Supra. That really is impressive value. So the question is, what is its competitive range? Is it as good as the numbers suggest? Well, we've already mentioned the top speed, which is superb on this car, almost as quick as the Skyline in fact. The acceleration is also very quick. It's not all-wheel drive, of course, so it can be beaten by far less powerful vehicles that do have all-wheel drive off the line, plus the fact that it does have so much power means that it can be inclined to wheel spin, as you'd expect off the line. Around the track, it takes some fettling. You do have to set up the car in the right way to really get the best out of it. With so much power going through the rear wheels, with all the weight of the engine over the front end, that really is very conducive to drifting, and it does make an excellent drift car, but sometimes it can work against you if you're going for a fast lap. Putting so much power through those rear wheels makes it very tail happy. This is a very slippery car around corners, sometimes even when you don't want it to be. So as I said, as long as you tune the car and set it up, and of course also drive it with respect, it will give you a strong lap, especially on tracks that allow you to use all of that power. But overall, this is a brilliant car. As far as I'm concerned, it's one of my favourite tuner cars in the game, and in terms of value for money, it's really up there with the best of them. So it really goes without saying, if you like value for money, check out the Genesis. But that's it overall for this particular pick. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.